Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk, this Tuesday edition of Focal Point AFR Talk. So again, just to close the loop on that last segment, we are going to continue to get ceaseless cries from big business for amnesty until we dismantle the welfare state and give people an incentive to go to work. Remember, a laborer's appetite works for him. It works in his favor. It works to his benefit. It works on his behalf because his hunger drives him on. He wants to eat. He wants to feed the people that are dependent upon him. We got 2 cats. I forgot about that. Rob reminded me I got 2 cats to support. So that's why I go to work every day, and you do the same thing. But if somebody's not hungry because money is being taken out of the wallets of working Americans against their will and transferred to them, then they've got no hunger to drive them on. And the proverb says, look, a laborer's appetite works for him. It's in his best interest, because what does it call forth? When we have to go to work because people are depending upon us and we want to take care of ourselves, then it calls forth certain things. It calls forth responsibility. It calls forth discipline. It summons self-control. It summons perseverance. It summons initiative. It summons self-reliance. It summons character. It summons maturity. All of these things are elicited from us as we accept responsibility to work for ourselves and provide for the people that depend upon us. Now, what happens if somebody else is doing that for you? It robs you of all those things. So what happens is welfare robs people of their initiative, of self-reliance. It robs them of character. It robs them of initiative. It robs them of discipline, robs them of dignity, self-respect, the satisfaction that comes from work. And I ask the question, what is remotely compassionate about a program that robs people of their God-given dignity? I say there is no compassion in that whatsoever. So if we want to deal with the press for amnesty, we're going to have to dismantle the welfare state or begin the process of doing that. And we need to get rid of minimum wage laws so that low-skilled poor people can get their foot on the bottom rung of the ladder of financial independence. Right now, if you got to offer $7.25 worth of labor to an employer to get your foot on the first rung of the ladder, it may be too high for some people. They can't offer that much. They can't offer labor that's worth that much to an employer, and he can't afford to hire somebody that's not going to generate more for the business than he consumes in compensation. I mean, he'll go out of business if he does that. So if you drop the minimum wage, there may be a lot of people that are low-skilled, but they're willing to learn, they're willing to work hard, they're willing to pick up skills on the job, they're willing to finish their education. I mean, they may start, a lot of people start making minimum wage, but they quickly progress to higher rungs on the employment ladder. So anyway, enough of all that. Now, I want to, Jeff, if we can grab the first soundbite, the A5 off the audio bite roster. This is President Obama this morning meeting with the cabinet, and the media was allowed to come in and hear him talking, interacting with cabinet officials. You know, and one of the issues we have, and I'll play some sound bites here in a little bit, that illustrate the sort of lawlessness of this president. And when you listen to this sound bite, you realize that this lawlessness, this is a part of his DNA. This is who he is. Let's listen.
To try to continue to advance the economic recovery and to provide additional ladders of opportunity for everybody. But one of the things that I'll be emphasizing in this meeting is the fact that we are not just going to be waiting for legislation in order to make sure that we're providing Americans the kind of help that they need. I've got a pen and I've got a phone, and I can use that pen to sign executive orders and take executive actions and administrative actions that move the ball forward in helping to make sure our kids are getting the best education possible, making sure that our businesses are getting the kind of support and help they need to grow and advance, to make sure that people are getting the skills that they need to get those jobs that our businesses are creating. And I've got a phone that allows me to convene Americans from every walk of life, nonprofits, businesses.
So that's President Obama this morning meeting with his cabinet, and he made it very clear we are not just going to be waiting for legislation. I've got a pen, I've got a phone, I can use that pen to sign executive orders, take executive actions. He says later I can use that phone to twist arms, basically. And so President Obama says, look, what do I need Congress for? Now realize how utterly unconstitutional this mindset is. By the way, the number to call if you want to join the program is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. But think for a minute about how this attitude is fundamentally unconstitutional at its core. Because according to the form of government that was created for us by the founding fathers, it's right in the Constitution, all legislative power, it's Article 1, all legislative powers shall be vested in a Congress. How many of the legislative powers are vested in Congress? All of them. How many legislative powers, according to the Constitution, are vested in the president? Zero, zip, nada, zilch. And yet President Obama here says, I'm not going to wait for legislation, but that's what the Constitution compels him to do. He is not authorized to act as the president unless Congress has given him a law to implement, a law to apply, a law to execute. That's why it's called the executive branch. So Congress passes legislation. It's the president's job, the executive branch, to implement that legislation. That's part of the separation of powers. President has no authority. This is why we complain about the judiciary. They've got no authority to rewrite law, to make up law on the fly, to impose legislative decisions on. They have no authority to do that whatsoever. And we've been complaining about that for years. Now, that same mentality has leapfrogged. It's like a metastasizing cancer. It's leapt now in President Obama from the judiciary. It's now infecting the executive branch, where you have the executive branch is thinking just like the judges in the federal judiciary. I'm not accountable to anybody. I don't have to answer to anybody. It doesn't matter what the law is. Doesn't matter what the Constitution says. I can impose, I can implement any sort of ruling or policy that I want. And this is what President Obama is getting ready to do. 888-589-8840 is the number to call, 888-589-8840. Drop down to clips 5, 6, and 7, Rob, if we can. And this is dealing, again, with the president violating the Constitution by making recess appointments when the Senate was not in recess. He had very controversial nominees to put on the National Labor Relations Board and on some Consumer Protection Board. They were nominees that were so far to the left that he knew that the Republicans would filibuster them and he wouldn't get anywhere. So he waited until Christmas break. Senate was still technically in session, and that's when he appointed them. And he says, no, I'm just using the powers of appointment that are given in the Constitution to make these emergency appointments. Well, if you look at the Constitution, it says very clearly that the president can only use that power for an office that is vacated during the recess. So if somebody dies or gets ill or resigns between sessions of Congress, then the president can replace him. But it's not designed for any other purpose than that. And Mike Lee from Utah talks about that in his speech on the Senate floor yesterday. Here is clip number 1.
Citing Article 2, Section 2, Clause 3 of the Constitution, the president claimed that he had the power to appoint these individuals without going through the Senate advice and consent process because, as he asserted, the Senate was in recess. There was only one problem with this. The Senate was not, in fact, in recess. Under Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2 of the Constitution, each chamber of Congress, including the Senate, has the right to determine its own rules, its own procedures. And according to the Senate's own rules and according to the Senate's own journal, the Senate was, in fact, in session as of January 4th, 2012, the moment these supposedly recess appointments were made.
So Senator Lee's point is, hey, the Senate was in session. We were not between sessions. We were not in recess. We were in session. We'd simply taken a timeout. It's like the football game's not over. It's not even halftime. We're just taking a timeout before the 2-minute warning. That's what we're doing here. So we're not in recess. The Senate is still in session, and the Constitution says the Senate has the right to make its own rules. So President Obama just invented this idea that they were actually not in session, that they were in recess. Here is clip number 2 from Senator Lee.
Based on what I saw today and the quality of the arguments presented to the court, I'm hopeful that the court will reach the same conclusion. I'm hopeful that the Supreme Court, will affirm the judgment entered by the D.C. Circuit. In a broader sense, it's sad. It's disappointing that it even had to get that far. It's sad and it's disappointing that the President of the United States was willing to engage in such a lawless act as this, that the President of the United States was willing openly to flout the plain language, the text, the history, the tradition of the U.S. Constitution. Ours is not a government of one. It was with good reason that the Founding Fathers split up the power, including the power to appoint people to high federal office, such that the President could nominate, but the Senate got to confirm. The President's approach, pursuant to which the President of the United States could himself deem the Senate to be in recess if he didn't think the Senate was doing enough when it went into brief sessions. The President himself could substantially circumvent the advice and consent rule that the Founding Fathers and the Constitution wisely placed in the hands of the Senate.
Wisely placed in the hands of the Senate. And I'm looking at the Constitution that Mike Lee's talking about. The President shall have power to fill up all vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of their next session. Obviously, the intention of the founders, in course of the time of the founding, they would be gone from Washington, D.C. for months at a time. It would take a couple of weeks for many of them even to get to Washington, D.C. to resume. So they needed a provision to make sure some of these central offices were occupied when the Senate was on recess. And if somebody died during the recess, the president could appoint somebody on an emergency basis, but it was very limited, short term, because of the separation of powers, and this president has ignored that. Focal Point, AFR Talk.